So today's presentation is going to be largely demo driven. I'm going to walk you through some tools you've probably seen or at least heard of, and then actually show you them working. And then we'll spend some time talking about them at the end and answering questions. The first thing that I want to remind everybody is that you really shouldn't believe everything you see on the internet, as the great Abe Lincoln once told us. So obviously that's a little bit of a joke, but that leads us into what we're doing today, right? Which is, right now, AI is a pretty charged word. It's actually not even the right word for most of what's happening, because what we're looking at is not really AI. Most of these tools are an interface to a learning model, machine learning model. AI technically is like actual Skynet type of machine intelligence, where it's actually thinking thing. And what most of what is called AI in these tools is really just an interface to a machine learning model. It's doing some stuff, it's making some decisions, but it's not a computer brain, so to speak. So, but the goal today is to kind of, for you guys, reduce the signal to noise ratio, kind of clear up some of the clutter about what it is, what it can do, and then talk about some of the ethical issues. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is creating copy, using tools to create copy. And the use cases for content production, particularly if you're doing podcasting, is really powerful. So if you're doing any kind of video or audio work, you can use tools like Descript, which I'll show you here. Okay, so here's ChatGPT, and I'll go widescreen on this. So let's say we're going to do some research. We're working on a podcast or an episode about aquarium fish, or and this is something near and dear to my heart because I'm kind of an aquarium nerd. But let's say we want to do a blog post or some other piece of content about aquarium plants. So what we do then is we say, okay, I want to do research on aquarium plants. And so I would go in and say, I can literally, in natural language, go in and say, build me a low-tech aquarium plant list of low-tech aquarium plants, including columns for scientific name, common name, position in tank, and by URL. And you see what it just generated for us, right? It just created that table. We've got our scientific name, we've got our common name, position in tank. And now notice I didn't tell it what position in tank meant, right? I just said position in tank, right? What color is the plant? And then give me a link where I can go buy it, right? All I did was say, build me a table of low-tech aquarium plants, include the following columns: scientific name, common name, position in tank, color, and by URL. Now, when I send that out, is ChatGPT going through a whole process of thinking through it and like determining what I mean? No, what they've done is they've indexed essentially most of the internet, including all the websites that talk about it. And they've put contextual markers on certain pieces of content. So position in tank is something it knows is related to, there's basically a giant database, but it knows that position in tank is related to aquariums. So I don't have to be specific, and then it'll go out and index all the information it needs and pull this back, and it knows how to assemble a table. But if I'm doing a blog post about this, and let's say I could also go in and let's say I'm doing, I have an Amazon resellers account or an Amazon affiliate account. I could give it my Amazon key, my buyer's key, and have it build me a set of buy links. And then now I've got a table I can cut and paste, drop into a blog post and go, right? So let's also say, so that's one use case, building a blog post. Then let's say we also are like, okay, write a profile on my friend Alex Lindsay. Some of you may have known him on Alex Lindsay. I'm using him because I know he's a pretty prominent person, and there should be information out there. Write a profile on Alex Lindsay, include his career highlights and social media links. So, and there we go. There's a career profile on Alex Lindsay, right? Alex Lindsay is a highly accomplished, influential figure in the field of technology and media production, the dynamic career explaining several decades, and so on and so forth. I don't know if you guys can read that well. His career highlights include being the founder of PixelCore, an esteemed online community of media professionals. Through PixelCore, he fostered a platform of collaboration. As a co-host of the renowned podcast Mac Break Weekly. With a deep understanding of virtual production and visual effects, Alex has become a go-to expert in these areas. The social links are this, this, and this, right? So there we go. Without me having to go out to the internet and look at a bunch of stuff, I now have a profile that I can start with, right? And I mean start with, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So I've got a great, so now let's say I'm going to interview Alex on a podcast, and I want to do a promotional piece in advance of it to tell people why they should watch this podcast. Well, now I have a profile that I can work from, right? And then if I want to, include that as a link in the podcast page, in the episode page, easy peasy. It's done for me, right? Now, it's not complete. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about why we want to vet this and work through it, but it's pretty darn close, right? So let's then say, all right, so we've got all of our pre-production and marketing materials done for this show. But we now want to come up with some really smart questions to ask him on the show. So I can turn to ChatGPT and say, give me 10 questions, if I can spell right, give me 10 questions about the cutting edge of virtual production. I'm going to come back here and say, give me 10 interview questions. And there we go, 10 questions. How would you define virtual production? What are some of the key technologies driving its cutting edge advancements? Can you provide examples of recent film or television projects that have successfully utilized virtual production techniques and how these techniques enhance the overall production? What are the same main advantages? So there I've got a list of 10 questions, and I could ask for 50 questions and pick the 5 that I like the most. But rather than sitting there and having to brainstorm them, I get a short, quick list that's a starting point. And again, I can't emphasize strongly enough starting point. And I'll come back to that in a little bit, right? And so right there in 10 minutes, 5 minutes, we've produced starting points for a blog post. So I could go back to that table. Well, you get the idea, because I want to move on to other things. In 10 minutes, we produced a table to go into a blog post. We produced a social profile for marketing purposes of our podcast, and we generated 10 podcast interview questions, right? Now, you could go back then and use Descript, and let's see if I can get that online here. And you could, let's say now we're in post-production and we have done our post-production on already, and we could then go in. I think this is gonna get us all set up. Yep, here we go. We could go into Descript and we could take a media file, and which I'm not going to do it here, but you basically just drag and drop your media file on here, and Descript will create a complete transcript of it. Otter will do the same thing, right? Descript is much, much better, in my opinion, and it offers some really compelling features that Otter and others don't, right? The first of which is just better at writing, at generating transcripts. It will actually generate the transcript, and you can go through and identify the speakers, and it'll put the speakers all the way. It recognizes the voice, and then we'll assign the speaker name to every different iteration. Occasionally, and all of them will do this, occasionally there'll be some crosstalk and it'll be hard to identify and it'll get it wrong. So you still have to put your eyes on it. But then you can go through and you can tell it to find all the filler words, right? The ums, the ahs, this kind of stuff. Okay, yeah, you can have it identify all that stuff. It'll highlight it, and then with one click, you can remove it all. So it's all removed from the transcript, okay? And if you're just going out to audio, it will remove it from the audio and do the ducking for you, right? So it'll drop those ums and ahs out. You get a cleaner transcript. You'll also get a cleaner audio file. It'll do it in video, but it doesn't do any like morphing or tweening between video cuts, like a morph cut that you can do where it doesn't do any of that. But if you're just going out to audio, it does a pretty good job of removing all that cruft and giving you a cleaner audio file that's a little bit shorter. So, but one of the coolest things it does is, let's say I'm doing a presentation about potato production, right? And at one point, about halfway through, I say tomato instead of potato, right? Obviously, I can't go back and fix that. I just have to own it. No, not necessarily. You can go into the transcript and you can take the word potato where you find it, and you can change it to the word tomato. And Descript will then use your voice that it's analyzed, and it will re-speak the word potato as tomato in your voice. So think about how useful that is. Number one, you clean up like little verbal mistakes for you or for your presenter. If someone uses a swear word, you can go in and change, F * K to duck. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of powerful, and it'll be in the word, and obviously you'd remove that one, right? But if there's something like, let's say you're interviewing a CEO and the CEO mismentions a partner, right? An important partner, right? Let's say one of their partners is Amazon and they say Walmart instead, right? Because they're working on a Walmart deal. You could go back in and change Amazon to Walmart, and it'll just change it before you release the episode. So if you got notes from your guest, easy to fix in audio. Not so much easy to fix. It takes a little more work and to do a fix, because you would need to do a morph cut in video or something like that, or just do a cut away from it. But if you're just doing audio, you can fix it pretty quickly. So those are the copy tools. Why would you want to do transcripts? Transcripts are incredibly important today, because if you're putting anything up to video, YouTube will create a transcript for you, but the transcript is machine generated, and you don't have any control over it. So you want to put the most robust, clean transcript up as possible. And Descript gives you the ability to do that, right? You can also then print those out save them out as a PDF, and then make that available as another asset or resource to people. So that if people want the transcript so they can go pull quotes, easy peasy, it's right there. If your host, if your guest wants a transcript for their own purposes, easy to hand it off to them. So if you're doing video or audio and you're not generating transcripts as part of your workflow, you probably should be doing that, because it's much more important, far more important these days. And I mean, it's always been important, say on a news level, but in general, you can use it for marketing purposes. You can use it as another piece of content. I'm a big believer in atomizing content and finding as many ways to dice and slice it and present it as possible. But the other reason is, when you put up a clean transcript, that's what YouTube will use to index your content. And the better and more accurate it is, the better, right? So that's a good example. The reason I brought Notion in, because it's ChatGPT, even though it's also using ChatGPT on the back end, is one of the really powerful things you can do with Notion is you can take your Zoom transcripts, like let's say you do a Zoom meeting, right? And you want to assemble meeting notes from that to give back out to your team. You can take your Zoom transcript, you can drop it into Notion and say, build me meeting notes. It'll go through the whole transcript. It'll identify action items and to-do items. It'll put them into a list and it'll organize it like a meeting summary, which is super powerful if you're working with the production team or you're working with a client, you're trying to get deliverables and everything locked down. So very quickly you can take that, get off your Zoom call, you pull your Zoom, raw Zoom transcript, throw it into Notion, ask it to take that source and turn it into meeting notes, and you get a handy dandy set of meeting notes pretty quickly. So, all right. So let's go on to creating images. So how would you use, what tools are out there and what reasons would you use them? So the soon to be 800-pound gorilla, if it's not already, is Adobe Firefly. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about Adobe Firefly in a minute. I'm not in the beta, so I'm not actually using it yet. But I've seen a lot of great demos and there's some pretty powerful stuff in there. And Adobe Firefly is really important for another reason, which I'll discuss in just a minute. You can use the big one, which I'm going to demonstrate that is being used quite a bit, is MidJourney, and DALL-E 2 is another one. And there's just a ton of them out there. And AI is being used, or machine learning is being used in tons of tools. It's written into Skylum's Luminar. They do a ton of AI edits, really powerful. And it's written into, say, for example, Mylio Photo Manager. And full disclosure, I used to work for Skylum. I currently work for Mylio as a writer. But those are two tools where AI is being used to organize and manage photo assets and photo and video assets, and doing like automatic keyword tagging and things like that. So really powerful uses of machine learning and AI to help you organize your content. Sorry, got off the sidetrack there for a minute, but the use cases for creating images are could be previs, storyboard, and set design. And I'll give you some examples of that in MidJourney. MidJourney works inside of a chat app called Discord. And let that start up. And while that's starting up, I'll talk to you briefly about why I think Adobe Firefly is so important. One of the very significant, well, if I see your question, I'll answer that towards the end. Okay, buddy? So one of the very significant issues with this kind of technology in general is making sure we protect artists. And because a lot of these, particularly the visual tools, are trained on, depending on the platform, but most of them are going out and scouring the internet for images to train their models. A lot of those images are copyrighted or unlicensed, right? And the argument that is made by the developers is, this is part of a broader learning, development of a tool for the greater good, right? Which I think is actually true, right? But as people start to make money, now you really come into licensing issues. And I think Adobe with Firefly has really, hang on one sec, has really done a good job of solving that problem. And I will explain what I mean by that when we get to that section of the presentation. So, apologies, I should have logged in beforehand to everything. So I should be logged in now. Okay. Okie doke. So we go in, basically Discord is a bot inside of, or excuse me, MidJourney is a bot inside of Discord. And the way you work with it here is you give it prompts, right? So you could say, let's say we're doing previs and we want, you start with the tag imagine, and then you give it a prompt. So let's say we're doing set design for a sci-fi. Give me a sci-fi background of a city dash because these are called tags or parameters. Dash v5, which is the latest version. I wanted to use the latest version. Dash AR for aspect ratio, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And we will make that 16:9. Okay, hit go. Now it's going to take that note, and I've given it a pretty simple note, so it'll be interesting to see what we come back with. Right. And we wait a few minutes and you'll see it starts to build it, and you kind of see it build. It gives you 4 examples, gives you 4 choices, right? So it's going through that process. But yeah, while it goes through that process, here's some stuff I've been playing around with for a client, right? They want to have a pirate pug. And so here's just a bunch of riffs and iterations I've done on the pirate pug. Let me make this full screen so it's a little bit easier to see. So if I click on there, I mean, it generated this piece of artwork from a prompt, right? It's a beautiful, I mean, it looks like a hand painting, right? Okay, here's some earlier failed iterations. So, but you can kind of see how useful this could be, right? Still working on our sci-fi backdrop. Here's another one I've been playing around with for a client who wants to do a set of, it's an aquarium client. He's trying to figure out a graphic logo. But you'll see here, like, this is a good example. It makes a bunch of mistakes, right? So like, that's a weird looking fish, right? Okay, that's a weird looking shrimp whose claws are hooked together and has got an extra eyeball. So, and the real thing that you hear a lot about, that's supposed to be a shrimp, but it actually looks more like a roach. Okay. It is, in fact, it looks like it's a roach that's got just given tiger banding, right? So it's not like you're going to give it something and you're going to magically get the perfect thing back, right? You'll go through some iterations. But here's our sci-fi backgrounds, right? So that's right out of Blade Runner, right? And so you can say, oh, I love this one. It's got this like weird floating ship. Okay, so you go in and you say upscale. U is upscale and V is variant. So upscale, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So upscale number 2, and give me variance on that. Okay, so there it is upscaled, and you got some previs for what that might look like, right? Okay. You can also do set design, like you could describe a room, it will give you an image of that. You could describe characters like I've shown you. And then here it is giving us variations on that same theme. There's a ton of ways you can customize this, and it's really becomes the skill here is really learning how to talk to it, because all of the AI systems are garbage in, garbage out. And I've been playing with them almost since the beginning when they came out. And I got really frustrated in the beginning because I'm like, this thing's crap. It doesn't really generate anything, but it really comes down to, if you're a creative person, learning how to take your creative mind and translate it into as simple a sentence as possible. If you're a writer, you might think about it like telling the tool an elevator pitch. Like, what's the simplest, most distilled version of, start with the simplest, most distilled version of what you want, and then get that, and then say, oh, I want to build out parameters from that. So then you use the same prompt, and you might tweak it a little bit. And then you can also go out online. And one of the cool things about the the way MidJourney does it is you can also go into the channel for MidJourney. So here's the variations on that theme that it did for us, right? You can go into the channel for MidJourney, and this is the community, which is also managed here. And they have a bunch of challenges and stuff, but you can go in and you can look in. You can look in here, and this is all people in the community creating stuff, right? And what you'll notice is here are the here's the prompt essentially, right? Cthulhu learning to use artificial intelligence in an environment based on Dante Alighieri's Inferno, right? So we get these images, right? But you can look at prompts and you can learn how to write prompts from that. There's also tons of information on the internet, tons of great resources about prompt design. And so you get tons and tons of examples, right? In the channels here, these are the newbie ones, right? Here's somebody riffing on My Little Pony, right? Well, again, we'll talk about IP in a minute, but it's generating all this stuff, right? So again, if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat room, and I'll circle back to them when we wrap up, or if I'll give us plenty of time to talk about it. So enhancing images, as I said before, these tools are really built in. I'm not going to demo these necessarily, but tons of tools, both on your desktop, your computers, both on your computers and your mobile phones. I'm going to get to the video in just a minute, Adam. So there's tons of tools out there that have long been built in. So the earliest ones were content-aware fill in Photoshop, right? Where you could kind of automate the copy and paste process of like filling in the sky, but now they've gone to generative fill where it analyzed that sky and it produces a much better response because it's analyzing the photo and it's kind of naturally painting in the rest of it. So, but again, Skylum, Mylio, pretty much every tool out there is using AI. On your computer, the two biggest and best ones that I've worked with are Topaz's tools, which there's video and photo AI. The video AI does a really amazing job of using AI to upscale. So you couldn't obviously go from you could go from 720p to 2K pretty cleanly. You can go from 1080p to 4K pretty cleanly, again, depending on your use. If you're going up size in video and you want to come back down size, like put it as an insert, you're going to probably have really great results. You can use it for denoising, and the denoising tools are really powerful, particularly for stills. And the video repair tools will, or denoising and upscaling tools will only get better as the stills get better, because a video image is nothing more than a series of stills just run at a quick rate. And so they obviously just require a lot more time and processing power. So these tools are only going to get better, right? And then you can do image repair. And Remini is a service online that uses AI to repair old photos. But all these tools that I've talked about will almost certainly start to incorporate really powerful video repair tools, so you can scan in old archival photos and automatically, if all you want to do is remove scratches and tears, it'll fix that pretty quickly. If you need to enhance the photo a little bit, now you're getting into, we're not just repairing the image to make it clean, but we're also now probably pulling out or creating detail that didn't exist in the original photo, so you get a little bit, in terms of an accuracy, you start to cross the line there. And then motion, to Adam's question. So there are a bunch of tools out there. I don't have access to these tools, but I'll make this deck available. I'll share it and make it available to you. And all these things are linked, so you can go out and check them yourself. But If you look at a thing called Wonder Studio, it's pretty doggone amazing, right? It's essentially AI mocap and character replacement. So you can take a video of you walking down the street, right? And you can bring it into Wonder Studio and you can identify yourself and say, make me a robot. And then you can bring in a 3D model that's rigged already from them, or I imagine your own at some point. And it will replace you with the robot walking down the street, right? And it'll be, whatever motions you do, it'll replicate. So that's pretty amazing, right? You don't have to have a mocap suit on. You can just be walking down the street in your street clothes, and it'll do all the IK stuff, that needs to be done in the rigging, and then it'll just work. So, and the results are pretty doggone amazing. There's another demo which I've linked here for Unreal Engine 5, which is a huge gaming engine, but the big splash it made a few years ago was almost every major set on The Mandalorian is actually a game engine rendering in real time. So like when Mando walks off of the Razor Crest, well, when he still had the Razor Crest, when he walks off the Razor Crest, that's a framing of the door of the Razor Crest and a ramp, and he walks down, and there's an enormous surround that's nothing but video screens where they're playing real time the planet Tatooine or wherever he is, and then they're recording that practically, right? So it's pretty amazing. But so Unreal Engine is, if you're in visual effects and in video work, you want to start learning about it. But the reason I mention it here is they did a demo this year for game devs where they did real-time face swap with a voice actor. So not that I'm aware of, but probably I'm answering Joe's question. Not that I'm aware, or Joe A's question. Not that I'm aware of, but probably there's a way to figure that out. I'm just not aware of it. But in any case, Unreal Engine 5, they did real-time face swap on stage in the demo. So they had a girl with an iPhone, right? That iPhone was connected to Unreal Engine, and she did a whole performance where she went from angry to sad, and projected over her shoulder was the AI, was Unreal Engine in real time interpreting those and putting them onto a photorealistic model, right? So you can see all the uses of that coming, and all that is just real-time mapping based on AI models. And then one of the things I think is really super exciting, and I have not seen this in action, but I have heard it described to me by several people that I know are very close to it and very close and are not people who BS, is real-time subtitles. And so this is the example I was given, right? So you have a Zoom conversation. On one side of the conversation is Indian man in India speaking Gujarati, right? On the other side of the conversation is a Chinese man speaking Mandarin, right? Neither one of them switch from their native languages at all. And in real time, the Indian man sees Gujarati subtexts derived from what the Chinese man is saying. And the Chinese man sees Mandarin subtitles derived from what the Indian man is saying, right? Two very different languages, real-time translation, real-time captioning, closed captioning. And if you think about, if you do international business or you speak any other languages, and you think about the fact that even if you're really talented at another language, you're always probably thinking in your native language, and there's nuance lost. And with tools like this, it's going to revolutionize, transform meetings, right? Because you can speak in your own language and expect the other side to be able to understand you. And all that's being driven by AI. So let's talk for a minute about ethics. And this is kind of the last bit, and then we'll jump into questions. I'm not sure, Adam, but I'll send you, you'll have the link in the deck, and you can check it out. As I said, I haven't used it yet, but when I spoke at NAB, I did a lot of presentations on AI, and I got a lot of really interesting feedback and talked to a bunch of friends there. So I have not used it yet. uh, but I would actually, as I sit and think about it, I would imagine that probably there's a transcript being generated to Adam's question. There's a transcript being generated, and that could be turned into an SRT file and then added to video after the fact in post. And you could also probably do language selection. So while I don't know for a fact that Nova does it natively, I know there's a solution that can get you what you want, probably, almost certainly, right? So let's talk a little bit about ethics, right? So as I mentioned briefly earlier, there's a big outcry about this. And if you're following the WGA strike at all, which is the Writers Guild of America strike, they're striking, and the Screen Actors Guild is also striking in solidarity. And the Teamsters are striking in solidarity. Almost all of, aside from the fact that streamers are, it's time to renegotiate the deals so that to accommodate streaming and the money that's being made off of streaming. One of the biggest concerns that the WGA has is the emergence of AI. And their concern, and when you hear, and I have a lot of screenwriter friends, and I'm, I write on the side. I write screenplays on the side, so I'm plugged into that community pretty well. When you hear people talking about it, they're actually not talking about AI, what the tools are now. Like, that's why I made the distinction before. We're not really talking about AI. We're talking about machine language or machine learning. But it's no less scary, right? Because Justine Bateman did a whole list of reasons why AI is a threat to writers, and you're already seeing it, right? In terms of marketing writing, like people are using these tools to generate content they would have necessarily may not have hired writers for in the past, and we'll talk about why I think that we should have it in a particular box. But the WGA is really concerned about, producers who don't want to pay writers going in and telling an AI, look at all the John Wick scripts and write me a completely different franchise with a different guy, but follow the kind of ideas of John Wick, right? To that end, you might really start to see, like, you can get scripts pretty easily online if you want to study a movie. Those things might go away pretty soon because they don't want them to be pulled in to train a script writing AI. Because the AI can learn like 3-act structure and a lot of the kind of structure of a screenplay, but the AI can't really replace the creative, at least not yet, and I don't think ever, the creative output of a room or of a writer or writer's room, right? They can't match it. They might throw a good skeleton together, but they can't match it. That being said, it doesn't mean that people won't try, or they might not generate a first draft of a script and then hand it off to a writer to clean up, and the jobs change dramatically. So the same thing, obviously, as you saw how quickly we generated really beautiful art off of MidJourney, visual artists and animators are rightly scared. Video editors are too, right? Because these tools are out there, and they're democratizing content creation in a lot of ways, but they're being trained off of sources that are not licensed to do that, which is why I think, and so I say that all to say that we first have to protect artists, right, and their rights. And you also need to protect your businesses, because if you're going in willy-nilly using these tools and you're not having a very clear strategy around them that accounts for your liability, then you could be putting your business in legal peril at some point down the road. But protecting artists and protecting your business are not at odds, and you can use these tools, I think, in ethical ways, as long as you are thinking about it and you're thinking about those two objectives, right? And that's where I come back to Adobe Firefly, because while I don't know this for a fact, what I suspect Adobe is doing there, right, to get around, to solve, not get around, but to solve this legal problem, is that Adobe has either commissioned artists to create art, photos, and other visual media, and specifically licensed that art that they created, meaning they paid the artist to say this is going to be used to train our model for Firefly. And those artists were paid and assigned the rights to that purpose, right? They probably also went out to their huge stock library and offered everybody in the stock library licensing fees to use their stock library to train their model, right? And that's ethical and it's correct, because if that's what happened, which is what I suspect, again, no inside knowledge, but that's what I suspect happened, then it's completely ethical, because they're going to the artist, they're telling them how they're going to use it, and then they're offering them the opportunity to be paid, right? And if they are paid, then the source artist is protected. To Adam's question, talking about that as an image created in Firefly or Adobe Photoshop, copyrighted if you create it using AI. That's the open question, because right now the US Copyright Office says a machine can't have a copyright, right? So as of right now, and that's a great segue, well, hang on, I'll come back to this, to the law. Notice the giant asterisk, I'm not an attorney, okay? The law is not settled, okay? But it will be at some point, right? The law will get settled at some point. I'm gonna move this here and then move this up. But it will be settled at some point, okay? This moment is no different than what we saw in the late 80s and early 90s when rappers started sampling other people's music and their new creations, right? It's essentially AI as generative AI, which is what this space is called, is, and it's still kind of a misnomer, but it's no different than rappers sampling. It's just sampling other people's work to create new work, okay? It's doing that at scale that's unprecedented and speed that's unprecedented, right? And these models were trained just like when Vanilla Ice, I almost said Ice-T, when Vanilla Ice sampled David Bowie and Queen for Ice Ice Baby, when he sampled Under Pressure, right? That went to a lawsuit and it got settled, right? And right now, and ultimately the way Vanilla, if I'm not mistaken, the way Vanilla Ice resolved it is he bought the rights to Under Pressure from Bowie and Queen, right? So he has the rights to the original song, so therefore he has the rights to sample it, right? I think that's how they resolved it, but go check the internet. But so there's a lot of in flux right now. It's not settled. The law's not settled. It will be. Precedents like the Vanilla Ice case will be used to help sort this out. And then new precedents will be set, right? So to answer your question, Adam, I don't know, right? I would probably go check the EULA, but I would imagine that Adobe's argument is that they paid for it, they licensed the images used to train their model. So they have rights to those images. They licensed them specifically from the artist to be used to generate new art. So the artists are aware and have assigned those rights to that purpose. And so that therefore, Adobe will argue, and Adobe is a $1 billion, 800-pound gorilla. Adobe will argue that we have done everything right and ethically. We've commissioned this work, or we've licensed this work to this purpose. And the creators have assigned the rights to the generated artwork to us because we paid them. And therefore we have the right to transfer those rights to the creators using our tools. Now, again, I'm not an attorney. I don't have any inside knowledge, but essentially that's how I think this problem gets solved, is that eventually every AI tool that's a generative AI tool will adopt this sort of model where they will go back, they will license work from other existing artists, and they will license it for the specific reason of being specific purpose of generating new artwork from it. Those rights will be assigned to the AI company, and then the AI company will then in turn, as part of your EULA for using that service, assign the rights to your creative works. It all comes down to the law around derivative artwork or derivative works. And so that's how I think this problem ultimately gets solved, right? So, and it still hasn't been solved. So there's a lot of open questions. So I don't have a definitive answer for you, Adam, but that's that's where I think this ultimately goes. And I don't think Adobe would be releasing Firefly if they didn't feel very confident that that it would stand up in court, right? Adobe's not a dumb company. They're not going to make mistakes, right? I haven't read all the EULAs, but as new tools come out like Google's Bard API or Google's Bard AI, I was fortunate to work for Google and YouTube as a contractor for quite a long time. I know that culture pretty well as an outside contractor can. And that obviously Google's not full of stupid people. And I'm sure they've got bright people on that, and they wouldn't be putting Bard into the world, nor would Microsoft be putting I think it's, I don't remember the name of their tool. But these companies would not be releasing these things if they didn't think they had legal standing, right? Legal protections. So,
hey Doug,
yes.
we are past the 50-minute mark. So just wanted to remind the attendees, that the next session, if they're going to another one, is going to start in less than 10 minutes, and that they will receive a survey once they leave the room. So you can continue.
Okay, so sorry, I could talk about this for days. Wolf's question: will YouTube accept the transcript, or you have to divert it into a caption file? I think you have to convert it into a caption file. You may be able to export. I'm assuming you're talking about Descript, Wolf. Assuming you're talking about Descript, you can. I believe you can export it as SRT, but if not, that's a pretty straightforward process. There's a conversion tool out there, I'm sure. So let's talk a little bit about how, and I'll just wrap up real quick, and then if anybody has any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So use common sense. And this is why I talked about, like, don't put these things into production right away. The uncanny valley, if you're not familiar with it, comes from animation, and it's essentially this idea that if you ever saw a movie called Final Fantasy Spirits Within, I think it was like the first major computer animated film that tried to be photorealistic. It's a gorgeous film, but there are all these little quirks that take you out of the results. sorry, my Alexa just turned on. There are a lot of little weird quirks that kind of take you out of the moment because you can tell they're not human beings, even though they're really photorealistic. That's the idea of the uncanny valley. That exists in AI results as well. So do not let anything you generate, particularly text, go public if it hasn't been vetted by a skilled human being that can look at it. The other thing to know is that almost all of the models have expiration date is not the right word for it, but they have a lock date on when their training is set. So like if you ask ChatGPT for a thing, it will tell you, hey, my model's only been trained through December 2022. So it's got a locked knowledge set. So anything that's happened past that date is not inside the model, right? So there might be new updates that aren't captured with your result. And almost none of these tools are actually directly connected to the internet. So they're not going out and searching the internet for you. So you won't get current events. But for the use cases that I described, you probably get 95% of the way there because a lot of that data doesn't change. But that's the reason why you still want to have a human being vetting it, and vetting the artwork. And I'll jump back to this and just really quickly, just in chat, what does this look like? Does this look like an IP that you know? Right? Given our time, I'll answer the question. That looks a hell of a lot like Looney Tunes, right? Well, the prompt that created it was, show me a coyote in the desert, cartoon style. And while it's not Wile E. Coyote, right? The visual style is clearly Looney Tunes, right? You put an image like this out into space, forget the overall rights of the original artist, Chuck Jones, you're going to get a takedown notice from Warner Brothers. I think that's who owns the IP now, right? Because they're like, you're basically aping our style, right? Unless you put out like, this is an homage, or I'm not making money off of it. This is all these things that you see out there, this is for educational purposes only. But if you try to put this into a book, like we're going to do a book about the Friendly Coyote, and you use this to generate your artwork for your children's book, you're going to get dinged, right? So use common sense, have people vet it. Jeff Foster, who's a guy I strongly recommend you look for and follow on Twitter and whatnot. He also writes a lot in several of the video production magazines. He has a great series on AI and the tools, and he keeps it up to date. But use common sense. But Jeff has this saying that it's like, artists are not going to be replaced by AI. Artists are going to be replaced by artists who understand AI. And that applies to every field, right? This technology's here. It is not going away, right? It's only going to get better. And if you're working in a creative field and you are not exploring and trying to understand the practical applications of and the ethics of using AI or machine learning, you are falling behind, right? And you will eventually be replaced by either a kid coming out of school who gets it, or a peer professional that's your same age that has done that work and then applies all of their experience and to using AI to help them make their jobs go faster and be more productive. AI is not going away. It's going to attach itself to pretty much everything we do, and you're really hurting yourself if you don't take advantage. Change is inevitable, but human growth is optional. So take that to heart. If you want to just take a quick screen cap of this, or just jot down my email. I know we're running out of time. I hope that was helpful. Let me know if it was.